On Sunday nights, we're talking about the kings of Israel. We're teaching on the books of the kings. And when you look in the Septuagint was the Greek translation of the Old Testament. And when the people wanted to have a Greek understanding during the 2nd century BC, they came up with the Septuagint because they lived in a Greek world. And the Septuagint, the first 4 books of the Kings, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, that is actually called 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Kings. Now, the books of the Kings has to do with 1st Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. This is the time period that Israel was a nation. When you think Israel, that's when Israel came back. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. Jacob means heel catcher, supplanter, or it means deceiver. Now, Jacob was a deceiver. God had to deal with his heart. When the Bible says, Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated, if God should have loved one according to his own merits, it certainly wouldn't have been Jacob. Jacob was a worse man than Esau. But Jacob's name was changed to Israel, and of course his father was Isaac. Isaac's father was Abraham. And Abraham came over here from the Chaldees, and the Chaldees was the mountains, and it was actually the magicians of Babylon, and Babylon was over here on the Euphrates River, and Abraham was in this area right in here, and when the Lord told him in Genesis 12, get thee up out of thy land and from thy kindred unto a land that I will show thee. What was he doing over here? Well, his ancestor was Shem. Shem was Noah's son. Noah was in the lineage of Seth. Seth was Adam's son. And when you look at the borders of the Garden of Eden in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, the borders of the Garden of Eden was the Tigris River in here, over to the river in Egypt. This is the same border, the same boundary as Israel originally in the 15th chapter of Genesis. So when God planted a garden eastward in Eden, this is Eden all in here. Jordan and Syria and Israel and Arabia and Egypt. All of this would have been considered Eden when you look at the boundaries of the rivers in the 2nd chapter of Genesis. So when God planted a garden eastward in Eden, guess where that takes you? Right over here in the area of Babylon. So when Adam and Eve, when the Sumerians, Sumerians, Sumerian, not Samaria, the Sumerians, all of the ancient historians tell us that life began in Sumeria. That was in the lower Mesopotamian valley. Well, certainly it did. That's the garden eastward in Eden, and that's where it began. So Adam and Eve were over here in the Babylonian area. Babylon was here, and this is where Abraham was because he was a descendant of that lineage. So that all started here, and that's what Abraham is doing here. He grows up here, and then God says, get thee up out of thy land unto a land that I'll show you. And he takes him over here to Israel. And when he takes him into Israel, that's the land that he gives to Abraham and to his descendants. And of course, that was around 2166. 2166 BC is approximately, we believe that's somewhere in that neighborhood that Abraham was born. So that's 2100 or close to 2200 years before Christ. And we know that Israel came out of the captivity somewhere around 1450, somewhere in that neighborhood. So they came out some 650, 700 years after the land was given to Abraham. And then they came out around 1450 BC. So this is the time they came out. Then they spent 400 years here in Egypt, 40 years in the wilderness, and about 275 years under judges. And then 1 Samuel begins somewhere around the area of 1100 BC, around 1096 BC is about the time that Saul their first king became king of Israel. Well, Saul was king, and then, of course, he becomes, the people ask for a king in chapter 8. Chapter 9, God picks out a king that's head and shoulders above all the other people. Chapter 10, Saul is anointed. Chapter 11, he has his first battle with Nahash the Ammonite. Chapter 12, he receives his coronation after his battle, and that's the chapter where Samuel kind of more or less choose out the people because they say, give us a king, there in chapter 8, when God was their king. And then chapter 13, Saul breaks his first commandment before God when he goes to Gilgal. He doesn't wait for Samuel to come there. He goes on and offers a sacrifice before he gets the message from Samuel. Chapter 14, the Philistines attack Saul, and they go crawl in a cave, and that's the chapter where Saul threatens to kill Jonathan, his son, because Jonathan eats something on that day after he comes back, after he has faith in God, and he says, let's go, he tells his armor bearer, let's me and you go attack the Philistines by ourselves. And when they do, God sees his faith. He aids him with an earthquake. And of course, when the Philistines get on the run, Saul crawls out of a cave and says, see what I have done, and I'm going to declare a fast, and anyone who eats this day, they're going to deal with me, and I'll kill him. Well, Jonathan stick his rod down into some honey on his way back, takes a bite of the honey, and Saul finds out about it and says, I'm going to kill you. And the people say, no, you're not. And of course, he forgets it and goes about his business. Chapter 15, he doesn't execute the fierce wrath of the Lord against Amalek. God said his kingdom's over with. Samuel, you tell him that. Chapter 16, the Lord tells Samuel, you go down to the house of David. You go down to the house of Jesse. I've chosen me a king among his sons. He goes down there, and Jesse causes 7 of his sons to pass before him. And he said, are these here all thy sons? God send me here to anoint one of your kings as one of your sons as king of Israel. And Jesse said, there remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keeps the sheep. And he said, go get David. We'll not leave here until he's come into our presence. As soon as David comes into the presence of Samuel, the seer, God says, that's him, anoint him. From then on, from chapter 16 to the end of the book, David is king as far as God is concerned. To the end of the book, Saul is still king until the 31st chapter. And we know in the 17th chapter, David goes and slays Goliath. Chapter 18, that is where David is brought to Saul, and Saul says, we'll make you head of all of these armies of mine. Of course, as soon as he's head of the armies, he begins to lead the armies of Israel into all of these great battles and all of these victories. And of course, in that 18th chapter, Saul begins to get jealous, and that's the chapter where the women begin to sing these praises to David by saying, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. Well, Saul gets jealous and angry, and he puts an evil eye on David and says, I want to kill this man. So immediately, in the 17th chapter, he is supposed to give his eldest daughter, Merab, to the one who kills Goliath. Well, he gives Merab away in the 18th chapter to a man named Adriel, and then he comes up and says, I've got a daughter, David. Her name is Michal, and if you want Michal, if you'll go out and get me 100 foreskins of the Philistines, I'll give you Michal. Well, I'm sorry, but David has already paid a dowry here for Merab. He didn't get her. What makes Saul think that David's going to believe him here? Well, of course, David goes out and gets 200 foreskins of the Philistines. Saul sees that David has a good name among the children of Israel. And in chapter 19 and verse 1, Saul says, let's put a bounty on the head of David. I want him dead. Chapter 19 all the way up through chapter 26, he is chasing David, trying to kill him. He says, I want this man out of my life. He's trying to steal my throne. And of course, in chapter 28, Saul goes to the witch of Endor. It's the night before his death in chapter 31, and he knows he's just about wound his clock with all of Israel. He knows his people are not even behind him. The man has participated in one of the greatest slaughters in chapter 23. He has gone to and killed Ahimelech, the priest of God, and 84 other priests with him, slaughtered them. And so God kills Saul, turns him over to the Philistines in chapter 31, and then it takes us to chapter 1 of 2 Samuel. In chapter 1, David hears that Saul has been killed in Mount Gilboa by a young man, and the young man said, I did this with my hand. And David said, you've fallen on a king, the anointed of Israel, and he tells some young men, fall upon him and kill him. In the 2nd chapter, David is made king of Hebron of 2 Samuel. This is 2 Samuel, and we know the 2 Samuel, the 2nd chapter, that's the introduction. Well, not the introduction. Joab and Abishai, the nephews of David, Joab becomes David's commanding general because he conquers the city of Jebus. And David said, whoever strikes Jebus first, that this is going to be my commander. It just so happens it is his murdering, controlling nephew Joab. This man is David's greatest headache. David said, these sons of Zeruiah, my sister, are too hard for me. I can't handle these two men. And Abishai was a loud mouth. He was always wanting to go kill somebody. Uncle David, if you'll let me kill that man, I'll go kill Saul. I'll go out here and kill this Shimei that's throwing stones at you. And David's going, oh, good grief. My son Absalom's trying to take the kingdom. You're giving me a headache. And then, of course, in that third chapter, Abner, the commanding general of Saul, who is still alive and well after the death of Saul in 31, Abner kills Joab and Abishai's younger brother, Asahel. And Asahel is fleet-footed, and he's chasing Abner during the battle between David's men and Abner's men. Abner's a righteous man, and Asahel is chasing Abner, and Abner says, Asahel, you're going to catch me, and when you do, I'm going to kill you. Because I'm an old pro, I can't run like you, but I can kill you if you catch me. And he did, and he did. And then in the 3rd chapter, that's where this comes about. And of course we know in the 3rd chapter, of course, Abner has placed Ishbosheth, the remaining. In that 2nd chapter, he's placed Ishbosheth, the remaining son of Saul, as king of northern Israel, and David's king of southern Judah. And of course, in the 3rd chapter, then Abner is killed. Abner is killed by Joab, by his trickery. He's murdered. And then in the 4th chapter, Ishbosheth is killed, the remaining son of Saul. And then in the 5th chapter, David is declared king of all of Israel for the first time. And in that 6th through the 8th chapter, the kingdom is turned over to David, and all things are well, and this is the best period, 6 through 8, that Israel ever saw. Actually, 5 through 8. Israel is just living in peace because they've got a righteous king. And then, of course, we get up to that 11th chapter. David has his affair with BATHSHEBA. He murders Uriah the Hittite, and David's life begins to go downhill from that time on. And, of course, we know that Ahithophel, Ahithophel, Ahithophel goes in cahoots. He joins up in rebellion with David's son Absalom, and they try to take over Israel. Of course, Ahithophel gives the best advice to Absalom. Absalom doesn't take it. Ahithophel commits suicide. Absalom goes against David, and Absalom is murdered by none other than Joab. And of course, all of this has detail to it. We've been through it. I'm just kind of reviewing it with you. And then, of course, Absalom is slain at the end of the book. And then David comes up to the end of 2 Samuel, and he numbers Israel, and God's anger is incurred against David, and God kills 70,000 Israelites in the 24th chapter of 2 Samuel. Now, we've gone through all of these characters. I've gone through detail. We've had every character in 1st and 2nd Samuel in a year and a half. We've probably got 75 or 80 tapes just on 1st and 2nd Samuel, and probably the most prolific teaching on this I've ever done, or that I've even heard of, because we've gone through every character in 1st and 2nd Samuel. If you want a series that will kind of let you see what Israel is about as a kingdom, get this series. And we're going to go through 1st and 2nd Kings. Let me go back to the chart over here. We're going through 1st and 2nd Kings, and of course the whole purpose of this is to see Israel as a nation and to see who they are. Here are the kings of Israel here. There's the chart. This is the chart of the kings of Israel. Of course, Saul is the first king. He lasts through 1 Samuel in the eyes of the people. David is the second king. He's the righteous king. Saul comes from the tribe of Benjamin. David comes from the tribe of Judah. His son follows in his footsteps. He's from the tribe of Judah. And then because of Solomon's wickedness, allowing his wives to keep their Shemosh and Molech gods, their sun gods and moon goddesses, that is the old fire worship system or the tree worship of the ancient world, the Ashtaroth. Ashtaroth, let me write that down one more time. When you say Ashtaroth, Ashtoreth is singular, the O is plural. When you say Ashtaroth, that has to do with all of the female deities. McClintock and Strong tell us that Ashtaroth actually covers all the female deities, whether it is Venus, whether it is Aphrodite, Mylitta. Mylitta means female mediator. She was called Queen of Heaven, and you find that through all mythology, and that's the Mary of Roman Catholicism, or the Mary in a Roman Catholic Church. Now, or it doesn't matter who it is, Diana of the Ephesians, these are all the same thing. They are the Ashtaroth. So when Solomon allowed his wives to keep their Ashtaroth tree goddesses, that's when God split the kingdom. There in the 11th chapter and 12th chapter, that's when Jeroboam, the commanding general of Rehoboam, went north and took the 10 tribes north. This is the 10 northern tribes on the right-hand column here. These are the kings. These are all the kings of Israel till northern Israel was carried into captivity in the 18th chapter of 2nd Kings. That's when God sent the Sennacherib of Assyria to slaughter northern Israel and carry them into captivity because they went after Baal in the grove and they never kept their sabbatical years. They never kept their weekly Sabbath. They didn't keep any of their holy days before God. And that happened in 722 B.C. In 586 B.C., Nebuchadnezzar comes in. This fire worship bleeds down into southern Judah. But southern Judah, Rehoboam is the son of Solomon. Solomon is the son of David. David is of the tribe of Judah. There in the 49th chapter of Genesis, when Jacob called all of his sons around him to give them the blessing, he gave each one of them the blessing of God towards them and what their position in Israel would be. And the scripture says that the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come. Shiloh is a name for Jesus, and let me show you what they meant. When you say the scepter departing, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, is my microphone still on? I hit it. Nor a lawgiver, when you see the scepter, when you saw the kings, they had the scepter between their feet like this, and they ruled with that, and that pronounced the law. That's what that meant, nor a lawgiver from between his feet. That's talking about, have you seen the pharaohs and that have the law, that have the scepter there, that have that crozier between their legs? If they picked that up and pronounced some judgment, if they said he has to die, that meant that was official rule, that was official law, and that was so, and the man died on the spot. So that's what it's talking about, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come. Now on the left side of this chart, this is all the kings of Judah. This is an exact lineage except for a couple of places here, particularly Rehoboam had a son, Abijah. Abijah had a son, Asa. Asa was a pretty good guy. In fact, Asa started out real good there in the 14th chapter of 2nd Chronicles when Asa took 500,000 Jews and went against 1,000,000 Ethiopians. No possible way that Israel could win. And the Ethiopians had 300 chariots of iron. The chariots of iron had those scythes on the sides of the wheel. When they come raging into the town, that thing would just cut the people down. You couldn't go against 300 chariots of iron with 100,000 people. Those horses were taught to run over the people and slaughter them. Well, they went against them, and Asa prayed his famous prayer. He said, Lord, it's nothing with thee to help with those who have little or those that have nothing, Lord. He said, let not man prevail against thee. What a great man of God. He put down all of the pagan idol worship in Israel. He took down all of the Baal gods, all of the Ashtaroth, and Israel had peace while Asa was king, but something happened. Baasha, king of northern Israel at the time that Asa was king, came down and attacked Judah, and Baasha was a very wicked king, so Asa goes to a heathen king up here in Syria. He goes to Ben-Hadad. You remember Ben-Hadad attacked when Ahab was king. He goes to Ben-Hadad, king of Syria. That's what he goes up here to the king of Syria and says, Baasha is trying to attack southern Judah, and I need the help of a pagan king. But it was God who delivered him. Over in the 14th chapter, he delivered Asa, and I was very disappointed in Asa. That's why in the Scriptures we find that David, Hezekiah, down here, Hezekiah, and Josiah were the only 3 kings in Israel that were named righteous kings. Asa would have qualified for that list if he hadn't have employed an evil, wicked king like Ben-Hadad to help him fight northern Israel. That's when the prophet comes to Asa, and he said, don't you remember when God was with you? There in the 16th chapter of Second Chronicles, the prophet comes to Asa and said, don't you remember when God caused you to whip 1,000,000 Ethiopians? And it is the words of the prophet when he said, the eyes of the Lord go to and fro throughout the whole earth, showing himself strong in behalf of those whose hearts are perfect towards him. And then, of course, Asa had a son, Jehoshaphat. He was a really good, righteous man until he started buddying and palling around with Ahab. That crazy. This guy was righteous, and he started running around with Ahab, and Ahab would come to Jehoshaphat there in the 20th chapter of 1 Kings, and he would say, Jehoshaphat, would you go with me to battle against the enemy? I've got to fight this enemy here, and I need you to go with me. And Jehoshaphat would go with this idolater. Ahab was married to, guess who? Jezebel. And she goes out and murders Naboth, and as if it was nothing, tries to kill the prophet Elijah, goes out and slaughters people, raises up Baal in the grove in Israel, and Jehoshaphat runs around with these two. Well, guess what happens when you do that? What happens? Your kids get to dating their kids. And that's what happened. Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, started dating the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, the most evil, wicked, low-life, scummy woman that you ever met in your life other than Jezebel in the Old Testament, Athaliah. Jehoram and Athaliah's son is Ahaziah. Ahaziah dies, and this woman is so power-hungry, she tries to kill all of her grandsons. She manages to get them all but one. So she's in the lineage of the kings of Israel because she reigned for a time. She's the only woman who was king in Israel. But that is the righteous lineage there. And all because, what do you think brought idol worship into southern Judah? Asa hiring out to a pagan king, Jehoshaphat running around with a pagan king who's supposed to be his brother, and his kid marries his kid. And they start naming their kids after him. Look at Joram down here. Here's Ahaziah over here. Here's Ahaziah over here. That's not the same Ahaziah, and that's not the same Joram. They just have such an admiration for each other, they start naming their kids. Jehoshaphat was a good man. What caused him to do such insanity? The Bible says we cannot mix good with evil, come out and be separate and touch not the unclean thing. These two men right here on this side and this man here, Jehu, Jehoshaphat, and Asa, they start out real good. I've never seen a man in the Scripture that looked like Superman and the Lone Ranger all wrapped up in one as Jehu. This man thrilled me to death the first time when I was about 21 years old, and I started reading about Jehu, where God says, Jehu, I want you to go to Jezreel and kill Jezebel. That evil, wicked, viperous woman, I want her dead. And Jehu is a wild man. He is the commander of Israel's armies, and he is a commanding general. And they said he drove a chariot like a wild man. And when Jezebel comes to Jezreel, and she's looking out the window, and she says, who is that? He driveth furiously, like Jehu drives. I wonder if that's who it is. Send a horseman out to see who that is. And the horseman comes and he rides out to meet Jehu on the plain. And he said, is it peace, Jehu? And Jehu said, as long as that hellish woman lives in Israel, there is no peace. Get behind me or you'll die. Here's this great commander. I thought, whoo, I could hear Jehu was on the rise. And then she sends out another. And she sends out another horseman. He said, don't talk about peace as long as she's alive. And he gets up to Jezreel and he sees her on the balcony with Ethiopian eunuchs. He said, throw the woman down, kill her. Man, Jehu broke my heart. He went back to Baal. Why? I don't know. I believe Jehu is a believer. What did David do in his old age? He numbered Israel. What did Solomon do? He allowed his wives, his 700 wives and 300 concubines to keep their Molech and their Shemash gods. What did Jehoshaphat do? These three guys right here, there would have been 6 righteous kings if he hadn't have gone and hired a pagan king to help him attack Baasha, who was wicked as they come. If Jehoshaphat hadn't have run around with Ahab, and Ahab's daughter Athaliah marries Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat. And the son of Jehoshaphat is Ahaziah, and that's Athaliah's son, and he dies. And she says, I want the throne. So she kills all of her grandchildren. And then Joash is the only one left, and he was hidden. She thinks she got them all. And the high priest hid Joash in her bedchamber while she's running all over the place looking for her grandkids so she can kill them all. Now here's the righteous lineage. And Joash and Amaziah and then Uzziah reigned 50 years in Jerusalem. A righteous king, just a wonderful man of God. He would be the 4th righteous one that didn't make it. Uzziah reigned 50 years in Jerusalem. And until the year of Uzziah, when he died, those are famous words in Israel because he reigned as long as any king. And then he presumed to go into the holy place, and God struck him with leprosy. How? And then Jotham, then Ahaz, and then Hezekiah. Hezekiah, the righteous man of God, and then his son Manasseh, not to be confused with the firstborn son of Joseph, the 11th son of Jacob, right there in the lineage of Judah, the most wicked king that ever lived. And I was hoping that God would send him straight to hell and kill him when I first read about Manasseh. And when you read about Manasseh in 2 Kings, you think, what an evil man. But when you read about him over in 2 Chronicles, he repents. This shows the grace of God that you can be the wickedest. He was more wicked than everyone before him. He raised up the Ashtaroth in the temple of God. He put a tree goddess in God's temple. And no king in Israel was ever that wicked. Manasseh had a son that was even wicked like he was. And between Hezekiah, the righteous man of God, and his great-grandson Josiah, they had completely forgotten about the law of God. And all the way through here, and Josiah read the book of the law. The high priest of God found the book of the law in the temple, and it had been forgotten over these years since Hezekiah, and Josiah wept. And God said, no one has ever followed the book of the law like Josiah has followed the book of the law. And then Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, and Jehoiakim, and then Zedekiah, the last king of Israel. This is the pansy down here. This is the biggest sissy that Israel ever had as a king. The guy was gutless. He was afraid of the princes of Israel. He was afraid of Jeremiah preaching in the streets. And the princes of Israel would say, can we kill Jeremiah? And Zedekiah would say, well, you can put him in the mire. Hang him in the mire. And they'd hang him in the mire. And when Zedekiah would hear the noise of the armies of Nebuchadnezzar nearing Jerusalem, he'd say, go get Jeremiah real quick. Hurry up. Bring him out of the mire. And they'd lift him up out of the mire, and he'd be covered with human waste from the chest down, because they hung him in a dungeon, and that was one of the receptacles for human waste. And they hang him in the mire, and stinking, he'd come into the presence of Zedekiah, and Zedekiah would say, Jeremiah, have you heard a word from the Lord? Yes, Nebuchadnezzar's coming. He's going to level this place. Okay, y'all can take him back to prison now. What a pansy. And God scattered them all over the face of the earth. He scattered them, southern Judah here. These are all the kings of Judah. This is the righteous lineage of God, regardless of Athaliah, regardless of the wickedness of Manasseh. This is the righteous kings. This is the lineage of God. And there's no way they could kill off all the people of Judah. These guys, some of them were sons of their fathers, like Nadab was the son of Jeroboam, and Baasha was just a commanding general, and he decided to come in and overthrow that dynasty. These men sometimes were sons and sometimes they weren't. If you were powerful enough, you could just take over northern Israel. But these are false kings here. This is the righteous lineage, and out of this, when you go straight down, it takes you to the first chapter of Matthew and takes you right straight to Jesus. Jesus was the king of Israel when he was here upon the face of the earth. He was the righteous king, and John the Baptist was the high priest. It was not Annas and Caiaphas. That takes us back to 1 Kings, the first chapter. Let's go back here. 1 Kings, the first chapter. How long did that review take, Mike? A day or two. Well, I mean, I want to know the time. I'm not here to joke. Huh? Okay, now, let's go back here to the first chapter of 1 Kings. David is an old man. We're coming out of 2 Samuel, the 24th chapter. 2 Samuel, the 24th chapter, David numbered Israel. God killed 70,000 Israelites. Now, people say God doesn't kill, that Satan makes people sick. No, God said, I kill, I make alive, I make people sick. I will make you sick and smiting you because of your sins. We're coming out of 2 Samuel, going into the book of 1 Kings. We're going to be seeing all of these men here. We spent two books on Saul and David. We're going to see Solomon and all of these men through 1st and 2nd Kings. We're going to go all the way through all the kings in two books. 2 books on 2 kings, 2 books on all the rest of the kings, and you're going to see a little bit at a time. In fact, we said last week or so that Jeroboam, of course, Rehoboam was the son of Solomon in the tribe of Judah. Jeroboam was his commanding general. Jeroboam took the 10 tribes north and split the kingdom. Rehoboam took some bad advice. It was all due to Solomon. God promised to split the kingdom because Solomon allowed his wives to keep all of their Shemosh and Molech gods. So God splits the kingdom. Jeroboam splits it and takes the 10 northern tribes north, or what they call the 10 lost tribes. They're not lost to God. Only southern Judah gets decrees to come back from the captivity. Only Judah, when they're carried into Babylon. Northern Israel's carried into Assyria. Assyria, let's look at this. Northern Israel is carried carried away captive by the Assyrians, not Syrians, Assyrians. The Assyrians are the Caucasian peoples. Here's the Caucasus Mountains here between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. Northern Israel was carried away captive by the Assyrians. The capital of their empire was Nineveh, right about where Baghdad is on the Tigris River. They were carried away into northern Mesopotamia. The Mesopotamian Valley is where Babylon is. They carried southern Judah away in 722 BC. See right there? Not 722, 586 BC. 722, northern Israel was carried by the Syrians, southern Judah by the Babylonians. Northern Israel being carried by the Syrians received no decrees to come back. That's why they're called the 10 lost tribes. They scattered northern Israel. I really want you to understand this. When Jesus was here, only southern Judah, this kingdom, was back from the captivity. Northern Israel was called Samaria. The Assyrians had settled in northern Israel, and they had intermixed their religion, they had intermixed their customs. That's why the Jews in southern Judah considered the Samaritans in northern Israel, anything north of the Mason-Dixon line, they considered those people as pagans. That's why they would spit on them if they got close to them. They said they practiced a polluted law. In fact, when Jesus met the woman at the well, in the 4th chapter of John, he said, "You worship you know not what, but the time will come when you worship God in spirit and in truth." Of course, his axe wasn't to grind with the Samaritans. He was grinding an axe with the people of southern Judah, with the Pharisees. The Pharisees were the rabbis of ancient Babylon. The rabbis of ancient Babylon were the Levites of the kingdom of God when they were a nation. So I want you to kind of get an understanding of this. Maybe I need to reduce this and have some copies made of it so we can see. If somebody wants to make me a little chart of that, we can give everybody a copy of it so you can understand this is the split of the kingdom. It's split because of Solomon's apostasy. It's split under Rehoboam, and the way God split it, I've said it before, the way he split the kingdom and said, "I'm going to take the kingdom from Solomon because of his apostasy," when Rehoboam became king, the elders of Israel came to Rehoboam, and they said, "Be gentler with us than your father was." And Rehoboam called in the elders, the old men, and then he called in the young men secondly. And the young men, his friends he went to school with, said, "You tell them, your king, that your little finger will be thicker than your father's loins." That was an allusion to his father's sexual prowess. And they said, "You tell them that your father visited them with whips, you're going to visit them with scorpions." A scorpion was a prelude, it was the predecessor to the Roman scourge, which had the pieces of, it was a little short whip that had leather strips, pieces of glass and bone in it, that took the hide off. Tell them you're going to visit them with scorpions. When he gave them that word, the people went to Jeroboam, the 10 northern tribes, and said, "Take us away from this man, he's crazy." That's when the kingdom split. And then Rehoboam says, "I'm going to attack northern Israel. I'm going to attack Jeroboam." A prophet comes to Rehoboam and says, "Don't do this. This is of God." So Rehoboam sits down in southern Judah and says, "Okay, I'll do what God says." And then when he does that, Jeroboam sees, he fears the people going back to Rehoboam. So he says, "I got to do something. What am I going to do?" And he says, "I know what I'll do." And he built golden calves, and he tells the people of northern Israel, "Behold the gods that brought you out of Egypt." And he reduces Jehovah to golden calf worship, and that's where golden calf worship is brought into Israel. And from then up to Ahab, all the kings that are evil are compared with Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. And even when Ahab rises to the throne in the 16th chapter of 1 Kings, the scripture says that if it had not been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, he built temples for Baal and for the grove in Israel, and then he became the wicked king in Israel. And then God said, because of this, I'm going to scatter Israel. And he sends Elijah out to come and talk to Ahab and tell Ahab, there'll be no rain for 3.5 years. And that's the first judgment of God when you start worshiping other gods in Israel. Now, we're back here to Solomon. We're fixing to move into this apostasy of Solomon. But first of all, we got to look at his life. Now, let's go back here to 1 Kings, the 1st chapter. Let me get me a drink of water here. That's a lot of talking. I'm going to repeat this about these kings. Does that help everybody when I go through these kings to let you know who they are and what they're doing? This is the righteous lineage. These are evil kings here. They have no business being kings, but they do have a northern kingdom, and since God split them, they're only righteous in one sense. God had to set up something to rule them because it was His idea to split the kingdom. But they are not in the righteous lineage. In fact, while I've said that, let me just go back to Genesis 49 before we go to 1 Kings and look at this one more time. Look at Genesis 49, and I'm going to keep kind of driving this in the ground and breaking it off, because time we get through 1st and 2nd Kings, you're going to understand what this is about. If you look here in Genesis, the 49th chapter, Jacob is in Egypt. Joseph brings his father over after the little episode with his brothers when his brothers come to get grain, and then he keeps Simeon, and he makes his accusations that they're spies, and then he says, go get your little brother and bring him back, and they bring back Benjamin, and then he threatens to keep Benjamin. They say, and Judah steps forward and says, no, if you keep Benjamin, it'll kill our father, and he's old, and it breaks Joseph's heart, and he says, I'm Joseph, your brother. Go get my father, Jacob, and then they bring Jacob to Egypt. And now Israel is in Egypt for the duration of a 400-year period while they're going to lay in bondage there. And Jacob, it's time for him to die, and he gathers all of his sons around him to give their blessing. And this is the 12 tribes of Israel, or the 12 sons of Israel. Look at the first verse of chapter 49. And Jacob called unto his sons and said, gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. Gather yourselves together, and hear, you sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. I am your father Israel. He was named Israel in the 32nd chapter of Genesis. Then he starts off with Reuben, the firstborn, calls him unstable as water because he slept with his father's handmaid, Bilhah, and he loses his birthright. Then Simeon, the secondborn, and Levi in verse 5, the thirdborn. And then he goes on down to Judah, the fourth son of Leah, or his fourth son by Leah, in verse 8. And this is important in understanding this lineage of the kings right here. This is very important. Verse 8, 9, and 10, and 11 and 12 is about Judah. It's about this left side of this chart right here. Let me read it here. Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise, because out of Judah will come the king. Jesus is the Lion of Judah. David comes from Judah. That's why God had to reject Saul and turn from him, because Saul comes from the tribe of Benjamin. He's from the wrong tribe. Okay, let's read this. He says, Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. They would put their hand upon their neck. Sometimes they put their foot upon their neck. When you see pictures of lion hunters in Africa, when they used to kill lions, you'd see them with their foot upon their neck holding their rifle. That was something that went back to the ancient world. Anytime you find the scriptures saying that you'll put your foot upon their necks, your hand upon their neck, that's what it was talking about. He says, thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. That's because they'll be the conquering king. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. All the rest of these sons will be bowing to Judah. Then he says, Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down. He couched as a lion, as an old lion. Who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah. This is what this is talking about right here. When it says the scepter won't depart from Judah, that's why Athaliah was unable to kill all of her son Ahaziah's children. That's why one got away. The seed was preserved right here. She got them all but one. One is enough. Joash was enough to keep the lineage going that comes out of David. That was the only son left there that was supposed to be king of Israel. So he says, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet. That was the scepter. This will be the lineage when Christ comes back. When you look at the first chapter of Matthew, you see Christ in the lineage of Judah. He says, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come. Unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Where do they gather? Around the throne of the king. Binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto a choice vine. The kings rode upon young colts of an ass during peacetime. That was the sign of a king. When Jesus came into Jerusalem on the young colt of an ass, that was a king presenting himself in peacetime. It was humble to God, but was not humble towards the people. It was saying, I am your king. That was the pronouncement of a king. He washed his garments in wine and is clothed in the blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine, his teeth white with milk. Now, let's go. Let me just show you this lineage one more time. Go to Matthew, the first chapter. Go to Matthew, the first chapter. I want you to really understand this lineage as we go through that. I've hit this before, but when you get in Matthew, the first chapter, you see this lineage. Here's the lineage right here. Right here. David, Solomon, all the way down. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begat Isaac. Isaac begat Jacob. Jacob begat Judah. It goes from Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons. Why does it show Judah? Because this is the lineage of the rulers. And Judas, his brethren, and Judas begat Pharez and Zerah of Tamar. And Pharez, you remember they were twins. You remember that was the little episode that Judas had with Tamar when under Jewish law, you remember Tamar when her husband died, that Abraham told Onan to go in to Tamar, and Onan went in and spilled his seed on the ground because he didn't want to raise up seed to his brother and say this will be heirs' children. And then of course Judah did not give Tamar his other son, and she went and seduced Judah. You remember that? You see, the scepter will not depart from Judah. Judah preserved no seed himself, so Tamar played the part of a harlot, seduced her father-in-law, and you remember how that when she was playing the harlot, she said, I'll tell you what, you give me your bracelet and you give me your staff as security that you'll come back and pay me for this sex act. For me being a prostitute to you. But what she was doing was a righteous thing, preserving the seed. And then when she goes back among her brethren, she says, I'm pregnant. And then Judah says, the woman will die. Who has done this? And she comes out and said, the man that this bracelet belongs to and this staff. And he said, oh, I am the sinner, not you, Tamar. Look at the grace of God in this deception here. So when you see Tamar there, look at the grace of God here. Judas had to be deceived in order to keep the seed going in Judah. It wasn't even by his will, was it? It's just like predestination. It's not by man's will that it kept going. It wasn't even by man's will that Athaliah couldn't kill Joash, and it wasn't by Judah's will that the seed kept going. It was through deception of Tamar when she played the part of a prostitute. And in this you see the grace of God. You talk about an orderly arrangement. And look on here. Esram begat Aram, and Arab begat Abinadab, and Abinadab begat Naason, and Naason begat Solomon, and Solomon begat Boaz of Rahab, And Boaz begat Obed of Ruth. And Obed begat Jesse. Jesse begat David. This is the lineage of the kings. And David begat Solomon, of her that had been the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And that's what we're going into right now. We're going into this right here. You can just put 1 Kings, first chapter right up beside that. And Solomon begat Rehoboam. These are spelled different because they're translated from the Greek and not in the Hebrew. And Solomon begat Rehoboam, and Rehoboam begat Abiah, and Abiah begat Asa, and Asa begat Jehoshaphat. That's what this is talking about right here. And Jehoshaphat begat Joram, and Joram begat Ahaziah. Wait a minute, he's jumped here. Yeah, he's jumped all the way down to, he's jumped down to here. Asa begat Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat begat Joram. Here's Joram. He skipped Athaliah. He's not got her in there. Of course, this is up here not for any other reason than just to show what happened here. And Uzziah begat Jotham, and Jotham begat Ahaz. Ahaz begat Hezekiah. Down here, he jumped some kings, he skipped some. Hezekiah right here. And Hezekiah begat Manasseh. Manasseh begat Ammon. Ammon begat Josiah. Right there. You see that? And Josiah begat Jeconias, his brethren, about the time they were carried away to Babylon. And after they were brought to Babylon, you don't have them here, but you have them when we get into the books. When they're carried, let me show you this. The last king of Israel as a kingdom, I want you can follow this, and that's why you say, gosh, is all this important? Well, sure it is. Because this way you can see this is the lineage of the kings of Israel. Hold on here, let me erase this. When they were carried away, now you're not going to find these other kings, you're going to find some of them, but they give this lineage here. The last king to reign in Israel was Zedekiah. The last one, Josiah begets Jeconias and his brethren. Okay. Jehoiakim, I guess that is the word for Jehoiakim, about the time they were carried away to Babylon. So Zedekiah or Jehoahaz or Jehoiakim, let's just put Jehoiakim or Zedekiah. That's the last king that Israel has in 586. And when Nebuchadnezzar comes in, he gets Zedekiah. Since Zedekiah did not submit, he brings the two sons of Zedekiah before him. He kills his two sons before his eyes, and then he puts him in shackles and carries him to Babylon. But the men in this lineage after this, these are men in the lineage of the kings of Israel. Let's just read it. And after, verse 12, after they were brought to Babylon, Jeconias begat Salathiel, and Salathiel, see, you're not going to find Salathiel, but when it says Zerubbabel, that is the same thing in the book of Zechariah as Zerubbabel. You remember the Zechariah speaks of Zerubbabel, and that's in around 520 B.C., that's after, in 586, they're carried into captivity into Babylon. In 538, Cyrus is the king of Persia. He overthrows the Babylonian system, and he gives a decree for Israel, who has been slaughtered and leveled, to come back and start building their temple. Start building the temple. They build for 2 years till 536, and then they received so much opposition that they quit building, and then in 520, that's when Haggai and Zechariah the two prophets come and tell Israel to get busy and start rebuilding the temple again. Well, that's during the time that Zerubbabel, Z-U-R-R-A-B-E-L, I believe it is, Zerubbabel, Z-E-R-U-B-A-B-E-L. Zerubbabel, he is the governor of the Transjordan, he's the governor in the time of Zechariah. He's the governor of what they call the Transjordan region. This has been slaughtered by Nebuchadnezzar and been lying waste for some years. So when Cyrus tells the people to go back and build the temple's leveled, Jerusalem is leveled, and they go back over here to start doing this work. Well, this is all desolate. The man who comes back during this time to govern the people cannot be crowned king because it's against the Jewish law for them to have any kings. So they have a governor. Well, who do they appoint governor? They appoint governor Zerubbabel, who's in the lineage of Judah, because if they had been allowed to have kings, he would have been the king. And you can find Zerubbabel in that 4th chapter of Zechariah. So Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel begat Abiad, Abiad begat Eliakim, Eliakim begat Azor, Azor begat Zadok. All of these men would have been kings of Israel if the Roman Empire had allowed them to be kings. Who was the king, the literal king of Israel when Jesus was here upon the earth? I mean, who was the king in the eyes of the people? In the eyes of the people. Who was the king of Israel when Jesus was here? In the eye of Rome.
Should have been Jesus.
Well, no. I said, who's the king in the eyes of Rome? Who was he? Herod. He was Herod, wasn't he? Where's Herod from? Herod was an Idumean. He was a descendant of Esau south of the Dead Sea. We know that descendants of Esau are not to be kings of Israel, don't we? It has to be from Judah. It can't even be from northern Israel. So if they had been allowed to have kings, these would have been the kings. Elihud begat Eleazar. Eleazar, that's just the word Lazarus. That's another translation. Lazarus begat Mathan. Mathan begat Jacob. Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary. Who would have been king of Israel before Jesus was born? Joseph would have been the king of Israel, his father. This is the lineage of the kings. That is this lineage right here. Guess what? Joseph is in the lineage, in the line of the kings. The king of Israel would have been Joseph, the stepfather of Jesus. Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. There's the king of Israel, isn't it? And who's the priest and the kings now? We are. He's made us priests and kings. Why? Because Christ is living in us. And what is Israel now? It's spiritual, isn't it? So this is the kings of Israel. And notice all of the things that happened that we can see this. Now, I just wanted to take you down that lineage. And oh, by the way, in that lineage, David, Jesus is equated with David himself, and David is number 33. And he reigned 33 years in Jerusalem, and he is the 33rd from Adam. And Jesus was 33 years old when he died. I just thought I'd throw that in there just for good measure. Now, let's go back to 1 Kings. We're going back to Solomon. We're going to see these. If somebody wants to make, we need it. All right, I've gone through this enough times till we're kind of getting familiar with this chart, aren't we? Huh? Getting a little bit familiar with it? We know these are wrong and these are right. But these aren't right. These is the right lineage, but Athaliah is certainly not right. And Manasseh is certainly not right. And some of these guys made some mess-up mistakes. Now, let's go back to 1 Kings. Let's go back there. Now, David is sick. David is an old man. He needs heat. Let's back up to the first verse and let's start reading through this. David And now King David was old and stricken in years. It's time for him to die. Time for Solomon to become king. Solomon's reign lasts until the 11th chapter. As I said, as we go through the kings, the span of their kingdom gets shorter and shorter. And David was old and stricken in years, and they covered him with clothes, but he got no heat. Wherefore his servants said unto him, Let there be sought for my lord the king a young virgin, and let her stand before the king, and let her cherish him, and let her lie in thy bosom, that my lord the king may get heat. They're saying, we need a young woman to give him heat. But if that happened, they had to add her to the harem. David had a harem. Solomon had a harem of 1,000 women. David had, I believe it was 24. Now, David is old. It's time for someone to take his place. Wherefore his servants said, Let there be sought for my lord the king a young virgin. Let her stand before the king, and let her cherish him, and let her lie in his bosom, that my lord the king may get heat. So they sought for a fair damsel through all the coast of Israel. They went on a great search for a very beautiful young woman, and found Abishag, a Shunammite, and brought her to the king, and added her, it is believed, certainly by most of the scholars, put her in the harem. Remember, the incoming king, this is very crucial to understand, the incoming king inherits all of the prior concubines and wives of the previous king. You remember when Saul was killed, and Abner was head of the kingdom, and he placed Ishbosheth, the remaining son of Saul, upon the throne. And then Abner took one of the concubines of Saul because he had a fancy to her. And then Ishbosheth starts to turn and correct Abner, and Abner is nothing but a puppet in the hands of Ishbosheth is nothing but a puppet in the hands of Abner. And Abner says, Son, you don't correct me. I'm the general. You're just a little bitty nobody. Your father was the king, and I'm taking care of this kingdom in memory of him. He said, I'm removing you from the throne. Of course, Ishbosheth was frightened out of his mind because Abner starts to turn on him, and the generals control the kingdom, not the kings. Well, that's very important to understand, because the concubines went with the incoming king, and the man who is going to try to assume the throne here is the older brother of Solomon, Adonijah. And Adonijah, when he fails to get the throne, he does something very unusual that incurs the wrath of Solomon. He asks for this, when Solomon comes to the throne, after Adonijah tries to usurp the throne and tries to assume the throne, after David announces and proclaims Solomon king, Adonijah asked for Abishag. That was in essence asking for one of the wives out of the king's harem, and that was a treasonous act. So when we get to that, you'll see that and understand that. Now, and the damsel was very fair, and cherished the king, and ministered to him, but the king knew her not. He had no sexual relationship with her. He was an old man. She was not there for his sexual favors. They thought that being young, that he would heat her up, that she would heat him up some way passionately to give him warmth. But it wasn't doing very much, because David has to be a very old man at this point. He's somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 years old, and he's a very old man at this point. He reigned for 40, you remember, he reigned 33 years in Jerusalem, right? But he reigned 7 years in Hebron, so he was a king for 40 years. He was approximately 30 years old when he is made king. Now let's continue. Then Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself. One more time, let's look at Adonijah. Let's go back over here to 2 Samuel, the 3rd chapter. Here is Adonijah, right here. Here are the sons of David that he had in Hebron. Verse 2, unto David sons were born in Hebron. Of course, Hebron is the city that's the head of southern Judah at this time in Israel. There's Hebron, just south of Jerusalem. That's Hebron. That's where David was crowned king of southern Judah. Now, the sons that he had when he was king of southern Judah in Hebron, unto David were born in Hebron. His firstborn was as Amnon of Ahinoam the Jezreelite. Of course, we know that Amnon was killed by Absalom in the 13th chapter of 2 Samuel after Amnon raped David's daughter Tamar. And his second, Kileab. Now, Kileab is, he's also called Daniel over in the book of 2 Chronicles in the lineage of David there. And it is believed that Kileab probably died in his infancy or sometime when he was a baby, because he's not mentioned anymore. Most of the scholars believed he died as a young man because it shows nothing. The reason they believe this is because it doesn't show that he is doing anything to usurp the throne. Either he died in his youth or he was mentally deficient somehow. Because if he was a healthy son at all, he would have been second in line to the throne. And he never made any attempt or came from anywhere, and we don't know where he was. We don't know exactly anything about him other than he's called Kileab here. In 2 Chronicles, he's called Daniel. And his second, Kileab of Abigail, the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And the third, Absalom. This, of course, is the one who tried to overthrow David there, starting in the 15th chapter of 2 Samuel. The son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, the king of Geshur. The fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith. The fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital. The sixth, Ithream by Eglah, David's wife. These were born to David in Hebron. The fourth was Adonijah, and he was older than Solomon, and he takes it upon himself to assume the throne since he is the next in line. Now let's go back over here. The king, anytime the firstborn would do something wrong to disinherit himself, the father in Israel usually could give his inheritance to whoever he wanted to, and God's promise is unto Solomon, the son of Bathsheba. After the first son that David and Bathsheba have in that 12th chapter, he dies. Solomon is conceived next, and he is in line for the throne of Israel. Now let's go back here. Where am I? Verse 5. Then Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared him chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. 50 seems to be the number of footmen that they had that run along beside the chariot. And that's what Samuel told the people that the kings would do. When you make a man king, he will take your sons and make them footmen. He'll put them as charioteers, and they'll run along beside the chariots, and you will be in service to him. And remember, that's exactly what Saul had. He had 50 men running beside his chariots when he came to Nob over there in 1 Samuel, and he killed all those 85 priests of God. And his father had not displeased him at any time in saying, why hast thou done so? In other words, David had not made any complaint. When you saw a man in a chariot with all those runners beside him, that was a man putting himself into position of royalty. That was saying, in essence, I am the king. And he was doing this, and David is a sick old man. Now, Adonijah begins to vie for the throne, and he's going to try to contend with Solomon for the throne of Israel. Anytime this happened, one of the men had to die. Well, we know who's going to have to die. It's going to be Adonijah. Adonijah was a very wicked son. David had many wicked sons. Why hast thou done so? He did not say that. And he was a very goodly man, and his mother bare him after Absalom. And he conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah. Now, Adonijah, he's going to usurp. He is going to be devious. He is going to go under and be subversive and eat at the very throne of his father. Joab is David's commanding general. Joab is David's nephew. Joab is Adonijah's first cousin. That's who he is. He's saying, Adonijah is saying, cousin, you know I'm this great commander, and I'm this great general, and I've got this great power. You want to join me in taking over the throne? Joab is the man who has been murdering people in Israel. He murdered, of course, he murdered Uriah the Hittite at the command of David. He murdered Amasa, his other first cousin, who was son of Abigail, David's sister. He was the son of, he was the brother of Abishai. He was the guy who murdered Abner. He was the guy who murdered Joab. He was the guy who murdered, who else was it? Who did I say? Abner. He murdered Abner. He murdered Absalom. He murdered Amasa. And he murdered Uriah the Hittite. Joab was the controlling influence in Israel, and he was the man that was David's commanding general. The commanding generals ruled the nations. He was the man that David feared so much. Adonijah knew if he could get Joab on his side, he had the power of Israel because he had the armies behind him. Well, he confers with Joab, the son of Zeruiah. Zeruiah is David's sister. You find the lineage of David in the 2nd chapter of 1 Chronicles. And with Abiathar the priest. Abiathar was one of the high priests in Israel. Who was the other high priest? Zadok was the other high priest. And the reason that he had two high priests, Z-I-D-O-K, excuse me, Zadok. Z-A-D-O-K. Zadok. Let me erase that. Zadok was one of the high priests, and Abiathar was the other high priest. That's because, somebody tell me why that was.
Came from Saul. Right.
Zadok came from Saul. He was of the lineage of Aaron. Abiathar was of the lineage of Aaron. And when Saul and David were at each other's throats, and David had been, well, it was actually Saul at David's throat trying to destroy him, David had to have a high priest to offer sacrifice. He appointed Abiathar. Y'all remember why he appointed Abiathar? To be high priest? Huh? Somebody tell me. Why was Abiathar high priest? He was the last survivor of what? Of the great slaughter of the priests. Remember? Ahimelech. Remember Ahimelech? Ahimelech was the high priest in Israel that Saul murdered 85 priests, and the only survivor was Abiathar. And since Abiathar was the survivor, David said, I will keep him as the high priest of Israel. But Zadok was the surviving high priest when Saul was murdered in the 31st chapter of 2 Samuel. So David said, I'll have two high priests. They're both righteous men. So he keeps both of them together. But when Adonijah starts to ascend the throne, let me write this down. Let me erase this up here. Adonijah is going to ascend the throne. He's going to try to take the throne from Solomon. Let's put down the men that he's going to, Adonijah. The word Adonijah comes from the word Jah and the word Adonai. Adonai is the word, is the Lord. That is the word, the Lord, Adonai. Jah is the word, stands for Jehovah. It's short for Jehovah. Adonijah means the Lord is Jehovah. That's what it means. They named their kids this way or this fashion. You remember Adonai, the sun worship, they took from Adonai, they took the word A-D-O-N-I-S, Adonis. A-D-O-N-I-S. And from Adonis came O-D-I-N. And from Odin came W-O-D-E-N, Woden. And we get Woden's Day or Wednesday from that. So Wednesday goes all the way back to Adonai. These are all derivatives of one another. Now, let me erase that. I just wanted. Now let's put down the list of people. Let's put down the list of people that are under Adonijah. As we go, number one, he's going to recruit the greatest headache that David ever had in Israel. And, what? Joab, the son of Zeruiah, David's sister, nephew. These sons of Zeruiah are too hard for me. If he gets Joab, it is only reasonable that he will get. Abishai was the constant, continual companion of David. Abishai is the one who was always saying, Uncle David, I'll take that dead dog's head off that Shimei that's throwing rocks at you. David, can I kill somebody today? This guy was, he was a loudmouth. He was a smart aleck. He would have been riding a motorcycle, but he would probably have been the toughest guy in town. He killed 300 men in one battle. This guy is bad. He loves to fight. Just give him a sword and turn him loose in the middle of a battlefield, and he'll kill everybody around him. Him and his brother Joab. They're mean. So you must figure that if Adonijah, if David is, remember, when Absalom was chasing David and trying to kill him, David had three great generals. Who were those as he was running from? He had three great generals. Joab, Abishai. These guys were great fighters. They could lead. These are two brothers. These were his nephews. And who was the other one? Ittai. Well, Ittai is probably long gone. David is dead. Abishai, we don't know where he is. Joab's survivor, but Adonijah probably figures Joab has got all of this pull with all the armies of Israel. I will recruit Joab, David's commander. So he confers with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar. Now he needs a high priest to offer sacrifice. Abiathar. And he's a high priest. High priest. High priest in Israel. And they are following Adonijah, helped him. Now, but Zadok the priest, let's put this over here. The ones who remain with David. Here's the ones that remain with David. David. Or you might say with Solomon, because whatever David says is going to go, and these men are faithful to David's word. So what's going to remain with David? And David says Solomon is going to be king. Here's the man who's going to remain with David. Here's the men that are going to remain. Zadok the priest and Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, Zadok is going to remain. So when Solomon comes king, he's going to have him a high priest, isn't he? You got to have a high priest. It's got to be a son of Aaron in order to offer sacrifice on the 10th day of the 7th month on the Day of Atonement. So Zadok, he's got Zadok the high priest. The only reason David, when Solomon comes king, Joab has to die. Adonijah has to die. And the only reason Abiathar doesn't die is Solomon remains faithful, that he is the only surviving son of Ahimelech. And Abiathar was faithful to David as he came out of this great slaughter. And just in memory of that, that's the only reason that Abiathar's not going to have to die in this coup. Now, let's read on here. Zadok the priest and Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada. Benaiah. He's going to have a mighty man here in Benaiah. He is the heavy. This guy now, this is the toughest man. This is a man that can give Joab what for. This is a guy you don't want to mess with. Now, years before, you don't want to mess with Joab. Joab's got to be fairly old because David is 70. At least 70 at this point. Joab is his nephew. He may be 50-ish. And it's not like he's in some kind of position that he can't be brought down. Benaiah was the head. He was David's, what was he?
He was his heavy.
Well, what was he?
His bodyguard.
He was his bodyguard. He was the head of the Kerethites. The Kerethites was David's bodyguard. Some people say that he was a mercenary. A mercenary is a man who hires himself out to fight battles for other people. It's the same thing as joining the Foreign Legion. It's the same thing as these armies that hire out. Those guys that hired out to go and attack Cuba at the Bay of Pigs were mercenaries. They were professional soldiers. Those kind of guys are just mean as snakes is what they are. They fight for fun is what they fight for. You pay them, they'll fight anybody. Well, that's what they say Benaiah was. This man was tough as nails. He stays with David. He was the head of David's Kerethites, or bodyguard. And he was the head of the Pelethites. What are the Pelethites? The couriers. These were the men who carried the messages. That was a very vital thing. That sometimes was life and death. This is the man who is head of that. So some of the people that are very important, this is an important man because he has great influence with the armies. They followed him through everything through 2 Samuel. David would give Joab a command, and Joab would just push it away and say, "Come on, men, follow me. We don't care what Uncle David says. We're going to do what I want to do." And David lived and stood in awe of his nephew, afraid of him. I still don't understand why they haven't made movies about this guy. This guy is a frightening, fierce person. But as he gets older, I would have loved to have seen Abner and Joab in a fight when they were young, or put Benaiah and Joab in an equal fight. Just I'd like to see what would happen because this guy, he needed to meet somebody one-on-one rather than always sneaking around the corner and putting a knife under their rib when they wasn't looking. Now Zadok the priest and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada and Nathan the prophet. You had to have a prophet to go to God. So they're going to have Nathan. Of course, Nathan is the one that goes to David and tells him, "Thou art the man, and the sword will never leave your house." That's Nathan the prophet. Now, and Shimei. Now, Shimei is the same as, that's not the same Shimei who throws stone at David. This is Shammah. It's just a different way of spelling. It's H-A-M-M-A-H. This is one of David's older brothers. That's good to have part of the family. That's Shammah, or one of David's older brothers. And Rei and the mighty men which belonged to David were not with Adonijah. The mighty men, that's all of the rest of David's. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Adonijah is presuming a lot just getting him a high priest in Joab. Because you've still got Benaiah over here. You've got a prophet that speaks the word of the Lord. This is the man who wasn't afraid to come before David and said, "David, there's a man that had a little ewe lamb and one that had many sheep, and the one that had many sheep stole the little ewe lamb." And David said, "Tell me who this is, and I'll kill him." And David said, and Nathan said, "Thou art the man, David." And it broke David's heart, and he wept. Nathan's still on the job because Nathan is an honest man. Shammah and the mighty men are still there. Remember the mighty men? When you back up to 2 Samuel, that 23rd chapter, all of the mighty men of David, starting there in about verse 20, you see the mighty men, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man of Kabzeel, who had done many acts. He slew 2 lion-like men of Moab, who went down. This is Benaiah. This is the Benaiah, the great commander of Solomon, and slew a lion in the midst of a pit in a time of snow. And he slew an Egyptian, a goodly man, and the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, but he went down to him with a staff and plucked the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and slew him with his spear. These things did Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and had the name among 3 mighty men. He was a great man. He was more honorable than the 30, but he attained not to the first 3. And David set him over his guard. He was the bodyguard. And it names all of the mighty men that were with David. Some of them are dead. Asahel is dead. Joab was one of the 30. Of course, he doesn't stay with David. Elhanan, the son of Dodo of Bethlehem. Shammah, that the Harodite, of Elika, the Harodite. And he goes on down here. And he goes down to, ends up with Zelek, the verse 7, the Ammonite. Naharai, the Beerothite, the armor bearer to Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and Ira, and Ithrite, Garab and Ithrite, Uriah the Hittite, 30 and 7 in all. And the ones that were left stayed with David, and they were going to go with Solomon. Let me continue reading here. And Adonijah slew sheep and oxen and fat cattle by the stone of Zeholeth, which is by Enrogel. And when they slew sheep, it was a time for feasting. And he calls together these men that he can assume the throne. And called all his brethren, the king's sons, and all the men of Judah, the king's servants. But Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah, and the mighty men, and Solomon his brother, he did not call. This is a secret coup that they're trying to throw Solomon out. They're going to take the throne, no doubt, and assume the throne of David. And Bathsheba gets real concerned, and Nathan the prophet sees this. Wherefore Nathan spake unto Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, saying, Hast thou not heard that Adonijah, the son of Haggith, doth reign, and David our Lord knoweth it not? Now therefore come, let me, I pray thee, give thee counsel, that thou mayest save thine own life and the life of thy son. We said before that in that day and time, when a remaining son was alive, when one son ascends to the throne, that they started killing them. That's what Athaliah did to her children. That's what Jehu did. Jehu was told to go and kill all the sons of Ahab, because if any of his sons were remaining, they would get revenge and come in and try to assume the throne from Jehu. That's what they did. They killed all of them. Athaliah didn't do anything different than a lot of the kings. The only problem was that was her grandchildren she murdered. What a woman. Well, say, how can a woman be that evil? Well, her mother was Jezebel. How else? She had the best teacher in the world. Go out and kill all your grandkids so you can have a throne? You think those people were any different than we are today? Crazy, isn't it? So when Nathan is saying, your life is in danger and Solomon's is in danger, if Adonijah gets the throne, Solomon, Bathsheba will die. That's what he's saying. Well, guess what? Nathan will die too, and Benaiah will die. Anyone who has an allegiance to David will pay with their life. Do you think the greed today is any worse than here? Because Adonijah is the son of David. Solomon is the son of David. And Absalom was the son of David. And Absalom tried to kill his father David. And Adonijah is trying to take the throne from his father David and from his brother Solomon. And he will kill his brother Solomon if he gets on the throne. Those guys didn't think anything about it. Killing their brothers and sisters to have money and power. Do you think anybody would do that this day and time?
Yes.
I guess they would, wouldn't they? It's not unlike us today, is it? Now therefore come and let me, I pray thee, give thee counsel that thou mayest save thine own life and the life of thy son Solomon. Go and get thee unto King David, and say unto him, Didst not thou, my lord, O king, swear unto thine handmaid, saying, Assuredly Solomon thy son shall reign after me, and he shall sit upon my throne? Why then doth Adonijah reign? Because he assumed the throne on his own. He has not been anointed king. David has not abdicated his throne. He can't take it over. Behold, while thou yet talkest there with the king, I also will come in after thee and confirm thy words. And Bathsheba went in unto the king, unto the chamber, and the king was very old. He's an old man. Time to die, David. And Abishag, the Shunammite, ministered unto the king. And Bathsheba bowed and did obeisance. Their courts were very regal. They did everything. She wasn't bowing for any other reason than he was the king. They did everything in a formal way. And she did obeisance unto the king, and the king said, What do you want, woman? What is your business? What wouldest thou? And she said unto him, My lord, thou swearest by the Lord, that thy God, by the Lord thy God, unto thine handmaid, saying, Assuredly Solomon thy son shall reign after me, and he shall sit upon my throne. When you look at verse 30, says the same thing. This is where the king sware and says, As the Lord liveth, that hath redeemed my soul out of all distress, in verse 29, even as I swear unto thee by the Lord God of Israel, saying, Assuredly Solomon thy son shall reign after me, and he shall sit upon my throne in my stead. Even so will I certainly do this day. I'm going to crown Solomon king. Well, it's all of God. He's got an exact lineage in all these kings right here. All these kings will come out of the lineage of Solomon. This is Solomon's son, and this is his grandson, and this is his grandson. This is his great-great-grandson, and this is his great-great-great-grandson, and this is his great-great-great-great-grandson, and this is his great-great-great-great heathen granddaughter by marriage. And so forth. These are all of Solomon's grandchildren right there. That's what it is. Whew. Where was I? Huh? Well, I just skipped over there real quick. Verse 18, And now behold, Adonijah reigneth, and now my lord the king, thou knowest it not, and he's slain oxen and fat cattle and sheep in abundance, and that's what they did at the coronation. And he is assuming the throne and crowning himself king, and he's having a big party, and hath called all the sons of the king, and Abiathar the priest, and Joab, your nephew, the captain of the host, the general of Israel, that's got sway with all the armies. But Solomon thy servant hath he not called, and Solomon will die. And you know how much you love Solomon. You hadn't loved anybody like Solomon since Absalom. And thou, my Lord, O king, the eyes of all Israel are upon thee. He's saying these things to David to prove there is a plot afoot in Israel. That thou shouldest tell them who shall sit on the throne of my Lord the king after him. Otherwise, it shall come to pass, then my lord the king shall sleep with his fathers, that I and my son Solomon shall be counted offenders. We will be an offense to Israel if Adonijah assumes the throne. And David, you know what that means. Bathsheba and Solomon will die. You got to do something today before Adonijah gets by with this. I'm out of time. Boing. Come back next week.
To be continued.
To be continued. Right. We're going to come back next week, and we're going to watch how Solomon cleans up the situation. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word and truth. God, teach us by these words how we're supposed to live and follow you and be obedient to you, and show us through this picture of Israel how that the church has become Israel and how that your coming is soon. And that's why we study these things, and that's why we're studying these books, so we can see and understand that you've scattered Israel and your prophecy is about their returning. So you can show us by these signs the coming of Jesus, the King of Israel, to come and rule us, the spiritual Jews. Thank you for your truth. God, teach us to continue in this word. Teach us the reasons for understanding these truths. And God will praise you and glorify you and give you honor for it all. In Christ's name we pray, amen.